Pay transparency has been with us now really for a little over a year. And it started on the heels of certain areas like Colorado, New York City that have mandated salary disclosure. And that's now been a little over a year since that started happening. And it's still in the press. And now we have some good data that we can take a look at the impact of pay transparency. We think of an article like this, which cites um, 4 key points around pay transparency. And we're going to take a look at just one of these, which is pay ranges. Do they vary based on higher paying occupations, or is it basically the same? So we're going to take a look at the salary ranges and see if they actually do deviate widely based on the type of job that it is. And I think one of the best tools to look at that is the landscape scatter plot. So in the landscape scatter plot, we can compare any two variables. And in this case, we're going to want to look at salary ranges against job title. So with a scatter plot, we need to plot an X and a Y axis. Right now in TalentView, the default here is plot a mid-posted compensation, which is the midpoint of the ad range, against the number of postings with compensation. What we're going to want to do here is we're going to change this to the posted compensation range as a percent of the midpoint. Now, why did I pick percent of midpoint rather than just the range itself? I think one of the flaws of looking at pay ranges is, as we know, pay ranges can, advertised pay can vary widely, from an entry-level position to all the way up to something like a physician. So by picking the percent, we kind of put everything back into a consistent context. Now this graph is already extremely busy, and we're probably going to want to streamline this. Plus, when we're looking at percent of mid, we want to get rid of the ones that are not having enough volume, are going to be really small. So I'm going to make a little trick here. And this is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I'm going to change this back to postings with compensation. And I'm going to open up the slide out and say, I only want to pick up those postings that are greater than or equal to, let's say, 2,000. And this is somewhat of an arbitrary value. And that's now going to streamline a little bit our presentation. So let's go ahead and put back our postings compensation range percent of mid. And let's revisit where we're at. So we're looking at percent of mid in the y-axis, and we're looking at the actual mid-posted comp in the x-axis. Okay, so now that we have this, can we really apply any conclusions against employer disclosed values? No, we can't. And the reason we can't is because we actually have a hodgepodge here of employer disclosed compensation and imputed or estimated compensation. So if an employer does not disclose compensation, the job board, indeed in this case, may go ahead and impute that compensation. So what we're going to do, just to show you what I'm talking about, is I'm going to go ahead and change the salaries estimated to true. And we can see exactly what I'm talking about here. We see a very tight range that has been derived by Indeed as an imputed salary. And we want to not include these because they're really not going to tell us about any behavior on the part of the employer. So what we really want is salary is estimated to not be true, but be false, meaning it's not imputed. And now we have a much better sense for what are disclosed compensation ranges. The article suggests that in certain occupations, certain job titles, the higher the wage, the wider the salary range. And here we see that there is some element of that. We see a wider range would be up in this quadrant here, and there's just really a few of these sitting out here. By and large, I think we're seeing many of the employers are singing from the same hymnal. They're putting it within, a reasonably consistent pay range. So let's zoom in a little bit more on this graph because we want to zoom in on the area that is most relevant. So I want to take a look at really these occupations, these job titles that are, generally in that under 100,000 range. And, we see that generally the blueprint, I think, is followed by many different employers, which is clustering the ranges in that 20 high teens to low 40% range, which may sound like a pretty high number, but it's really actually, I think, a pretty reasonable variation. And the type of job seems to be, again, pretty variable. We might see something like dog groomer here, bartender server here, but at the same time, we would go down here to nurse practitioner and see that there's a pretty small variation, even though it's a higher paying position. One other thing I did here is I wanted to see the movement within the percent of mid. And so I did a couple simple adjustments is I changed the time intelligence calculation to quarter over quarter, and I extended the time horizon to 12 months rather than 6 months. And the purpose of this then is to see, are we seeing wholesale changes over the last year? And the short answer is we're not. I mean, we're seeing a few, so like speech therapists here went up, the range itself went up 15%. Remember, that's percent of mid changing 15%. Something down here changed on the other extreme, electrician. But by and large, most of our changes have been in that, -5 to +5%, maybe a few that are in that 10% range. So again, my conclusion is that employers are actually complying reasonably well with pay transparency. We don't see really any evidence of gamesmanship. And I think, again, we're seeing some pretty consistent reporting, which again bodes well for the whole intent of pay transparency.